Good afternoon and welcome to the public meeting of Randwick Local Planning Panel on the 11th of November 2021. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'm the chair of the panel and my name is Annalise Tor. Joining me today via video conference are Deborah Laidlaw and Jason Perica as expert members, and the community representative is Peter Ryan. The panel has individually undertaken inspections for all DA items from the street and surrounding area or electronically. We have been provided with an assessment report prepared by council staff who have also briefed the panel on each application. Today we have people registered to address the panel. The order of speakers for each item will be firstly councillors, objectors and then those supporting the application, including the applicant or their representatives. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes. Any extension of time will be at my discretion of chair. The panel has been provided with copies of all the submissions received in response to the public exhibition of the application and forwarded a copy of late correspondence. Therefore, there is no need for speakers to repeat all the points made on those submissions or by previous speakers. Please focus on the key points you wish to understand and consider. The applicant may wish to address issues raised in the council's report, including the response to conditions and the issue raised by objector or reasons for refusal. We may ask questions of the speakers to clarify our understanding of what is being said. We expect that each speaker will be heard in silence while they are addressing the panel, and that courtesy and respect will be observed throughout this teleconference. I ask that everyone mutes their microphone unless they are called on to speak, noting that we have the ability to mute all attendees or individuals. After hearing from the speakers on all items, the public meeting will be closed and the panel will then deliberate and make our decision. The minutes of the panel's decision, including our reasons, will be available on Council's website as soon as possible after the public meeting. And you should be aware that the panel meetings are recorded and the audio recordings will also be uploaded to Council's website. Each member of the panel has been asked prior to the meeting to advise whether they have a conflict of interest to declare in relation to any item on the agenda, and I can confirm that no conflicts of interest have been declared. So the first item on the agenda is 256 to 258 Maroubra Road, Maroubra. And we have the objector, Mr. Adrian Faulkner, who wishes to speak. Is Mr. Faulkner there?
I'm muting myself. For the 3 minutes, please, Chair.
Sorry?
Commission, may I begin to speak for 3 minutes?
Yes, begin now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, everyone. My name is Adam. I'm the owner of one of the units at 260 Maroubra Road next door. I won't specify which unit because when I started this objection, I did cop line abuse. So if this call is going to be posted publicly, I won't state my exact address. Look, I'd like to say, I'm not against a development. I recognise that particular piece of land from 2008, I always knew there'd be a development there. And my objection, I guess, is the type of development. I know that's a contentious point. We can respect all of each other's opinions. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a property professional, so I just come here from a practical basis. And I've also got a few what I hope will be helpful suggestions. So I have 4 points. I'm trying to keep to time here. Please keep me honest. The first is really based on noise. I know there's been an assessment done. My point on face.
So, Mr. Faulkner, I'm losing sound from you. So maybe you should turn your video off, and that might improve the sound quality. Are you there?
And let me know if you can't hear me. Yes,
we can hear you now. Yes, we can hear you now. Now I can't hear you.
Okay. I will go on to speaker. speakerphone.
Okay.
Without the earbuds. I apologise for the interruption. Can you hear me now, Chair?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Annalise? I apologise for this, everyone. If I may recap, I do apologise for wasting your time. I have 4 points with some helpful suggestions. The first is noise. I know there's been a noise assessment, but on a practical level, the communal area, which is for 10 people, possibly more, 3 times a day, directly adjacent to the living and bedroom areas of 260 Maroubra Road. On Maroubra Road, those living areas are all glass, floor-to-ceiling glass on the west side, and that communal area will be on the eastern side. So it'll be directly kind of conflicting there. So my helpful suggestion is that if the development's floor plan, at least for the communal area, could be flipped to the western side, it wouldn't face the 260 Maroubra property. This is the case for the 262, and I believe 254, the Galvin. So a lot of those properties there have the brick wall on the eastern side and the living and the glass and everything primarily on the western side. And that way we don't have the kind of neighborhood noise. I'm probably overrunning for time, so I'll keep it very brief. The other is the type of property. I know this is a contentious point. I guess what it really comes down to is if there's any impact to the property value or rental income, things of that nature. I'm still not, I've asked, but I don't know the type of property. Some of the boarding house will be much more supported more than perhaps others. Women's shelter, for example, will be fully supported, as opposed to, I don't want to draw conclusions here, something that might be drug or rehab related. I'd just like to make the point, before moving to Maroubra, I lived in Potts Point, King's Cross. I've lived in this kind of community, so I don't want to go back to that kind of community. I appreciate that crime is a contentious link to make, irrespective of social class. I think all I can say is noise, value, and crime is something that can be measured before and after the development. So why don't we make good decisions today, rather than I told you so, or negative impact or negative conversations later. Last but not least, is a small point, but one that I feel a little strongly about, is traffic in the parallel Galvin Road. It's a small road, it's a quiet street, residential. For years, people that don't live there have used that road to park. I feel if there's anything can be done to ensure that the new residents don't also park in that small street, that would be wonderful. I'd just like to say, we have objectors, final point, supporters. We can all respect each other's opinion here. I don't want to go back down the path of what I experienced online. And I know what you're all thinking. If you're a supporter, you're thinking this guy is not in my backyard kind of attitude, and I'll own it. That's true. It literally is in my backyard. It'll be the communal area will be maybe 8 meters from my bedroom and my child's bedroom.
Right.
So I just asked.
You're actually over time, Mr. Faulkner, so
okay.
If you could just wrap up.
That's my final. I just ask everyone to consider. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I'll just see if the panel members have any questions. Any questions? No questions.
No questions. No.
Thank you. So the next objector is Mr. Greg Flood. Is Mr. Flood there?
Mr. Flood, can you unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now, yes.
Hello.
You ready? Yes, can you hear us? Okay, so you ready to start?
Yes, yeah. I'm Gregory Flood. I reside at 252 to 254 Maroubra Road. I basically agree with all the points that Adrian raised, but it would be attractive to a boarding house. 2 car spots. I mean, it's an industrial area, and when I think it will, ongoing or forward selling of it. That is my main concern, but everything.
You're breaking up a bit from my end. Do you want to just repeat that last?
I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah, on and off. I'll put
My main concern is that better?
Yeah. No, I can't hear you now. Are other
Can you
people
hear
having
me
the
now?
same problem, or is it?
Yeah, same problem. It's breaking up.
Okay. All right. So do you want to just, are you on speak? Look, you're breaking up.
You're breaking up.
Okay, so okay, my understanding is you're saying that you agree with what the previous speaker has said and you've got concerns largely about traffic, etc. Are there other issues that you wanted to raise?
Traffic and the type of tenancy that you will be attracting to the boarding house.
Okay, so they're your main concerns?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
My main concerns, yeah.
Okay.
That's better, yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you now quite clearly. All right, I'll just see if the panel members have got any questions. Any questions? No. All right, thank you very much, Mr. Flood. And
Thank you.
The next speaker, sorry, I'll just get my list up, is on behalf of the Land and Housing Corporation, Mr. Ambrose Marquet.
Hi, thank you. Given the time constraints, I'll try and keep it brief. Hopefully everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'd first like to thank the council officers for their recommendation of approval and for working with LAC on this important project. As the panel may know, LAC is a social housing provider for the state, and our core function is to provide suitable housing for people in need in well-located areas. This particular location in Maroubra is approximately 500 metres from the junction, has a high-frequency bus service basically at the door, the return service within 100 metres, local shops within 150 metres, and great access to local parks and community facilities. LAC's overall objective is to reduce the average age of our dwellings and to provide more suitable housing for the tenants that need it. Given the time constraints, I might skip over what LAC is trying to do, but essentially providing more energy efficient, more accessible dwellings in high need areas, which Maroubra is identified as. So to alleviate some of the previous concerns raised, the tenancy will be for single older women through women's housing. The community housing provider has indicated that they'll be coming on board to manage this property. So the core tenancy group will be as preferred from the commenters that have previously spoken. The issue around the COS and noise generation, we would say that it's a similar noise generation to any other residential use. One thing that we have gone a bit above and beyond and may help alleviate some concerns is that every unit has their own private open space facing either towards Maroubra Road or towards the rear. So we would expect that people would generally congregate in their private open space compared to a more traditional boarding house where the outdoor space is used more communally. LAC encourages people to use their private open space to minimise impacts on neighbours. Just to give an idea of the need, 58% of the priority waitlist in the area is currently waiting for studios or one bedrooms. So the lifted one bedroom design will really help the single older women waiting to get into housing as soon as possible. Like I was saying before, the building has been designed with tenant comfort and amenity in the front of mind. So they're as large as they can be to be compliant with the SEP to ensure that people are able to enjoy the unit and live in a peaceful way and not be too dissimilar to a residential flat building in a similar location. So this is an efficient way for LAC to meet its growing demand, and older women being the single fastest growing demographic on the priority wait list in the state of New South Wales. So they're a high priority and high risk of homelessness. To ensure that we keep housing the tenants in the areas that they currently live, if this is a product that is suitable in this instance. So I'd like to thank the panel for their time. Any questions? We can answer them now.
All right. Yeah, I think there are a few questions. I've got one. condition 55 requires that an updated plan of management be submitted, but it doesn't actually say it's submitted to council, but it doesn't actually say for the approval of council. So would you have any objection if that is actually amended in the condition?
Because it's a Crown consent, we can't agree to any further approvals from council, so we would be willing to work with council and submit to them the plan of management in accordance with their policies, but it would constitute a further approval to get it approved by council added to the condition.
Okay, so if it was amended to say amended in accordance with council policies.
Yes, that's fine. I would accept that.
And in consultation with council where necessary. Consultation is not necessary.
Consultation in accordance with policies is completely fine, just not further approval.
Yep, sure. And also condition 56, I think it's 56, requires that there be acoustic testing once it's operated, or I'm not sure if that's the one, or it requires that it be in accordance with the acoustic report. But when we look at the acoustic report, and we've only had it very, haven't actually drilled down completely with it, it seems to require that there be a 3-metre wall adjoining the communal open space. Is that your understanding?
My understanding was that this condition had been requested to be deleted, given its residential usage in a residential area. The acoustic report does request a noise intervention wall. So I had seen on our response to council that this was deleted or to be amended, given that it's residential usage in a residential area. There's nothing that actually triggers requiring an acoustic report.
Okay, so some of the conditions you've actually responded to and asked that they be changed or deleted, have you?
Yeah, that's correct. And the updated conditions were sent back. I don't personally go through, so the planner that did this job is on leave at the moment. But
so, okay, I'll need to check with the council officer that the version that we've got is the version that you've responded to in the agenda papers.
Annalise, I can answer that. William
Yeah.
Jones, Randwick City Council, yes, the conditions that the panel have before you are the ones that have been reviewed by the applicant.
Okay, so the condition that requires that, that it comply with the acoustic report, which is in the version that we've got, was not requested to be changed, as far as you understand.
I will need to look into that, Annalise. I think that the condition requiring it to be in accordance with the acoustic reports is still there, but we will check that.
Okay. All right. And I think there was just a few queries about the treatment of the car parking on the front elevation, but I think Ms. Laidlaw, that was something you wanted to raise.
Yeah. Look, just with the opening, it's a very wide opening, and in terms of the hard surfacing for the car parking, and also there's quite it might be deemed a concealed entry for people accessing the front door through the car park. Would you have any objection if, for example, the pedestrian entry was moved, a secure pedestrian entry moved to the front of the building, or maybe even a roller shutter door over the car parking, which would make that a secure area?
If the roller shutter door could be accommodated, I would have no issue with that. So it would be something that would have to be explored. The pedestrian entry is located like that because of the high retention tree in the frontage. So to ensure that the tree lives, the pedestrian entry actually came kind of in a weird way. I can share the plans if everyone wants to see.
Yeah. No objection to the curved entry. It's just that because of that big wide opening for the garage, and also the fact that someone would have to go through the garage, which is not a secure space to get to the front door, that it might be a better treatment if the whole of that front was secured with some sort of garage door, and also a door leading into the entryway right at the frontage of the building rather than set back, recessed behind in the garage?
I guess there is a design logic to how it's been done. I'll try and articulate as a non-architect and from a bit of LAC perspective. So we tend to prefer to not have garage doors on parking spaces to avoid hoarding issues and compiling of rubbish. So leaving them open actually prevents crime, in our experience with many properties under management, prevents crime issues that I guess in a private development can be managed in a different way by securing access. The door being recessed, I understand your point, but if we were to bring it out, it eats into the shared space. So the disabled space actually accesses onto there. So it would be creating an internal hallway next to the disabled space. And then I would have to check with the access consultant, but I'd say there'd be potential compliance issues.
Do you want to just put the plan up? And
I think it's actually about 3.6 metres, excluding the pedestrian access way, which I think should be okay.
So I think this is the plan. No, sorry. So I have too much open.
maybe it's quicker if council puts it up.
I think I got there as you said that.
Okay.
So this being the accessible space, this being, yes, the minimum width required for the adaptable space. But if we were to make this into a corridor, I don't know that we'd have the width required to open the doors and get out safely. The other additional thing to that would be we'd need another entry door somewhere along here, or they'd have to leave out the roller door into the weather to go back into the front door.
Have you got
Okay, I think
there might be an issue
Sorry,
with
Jason.
ventilation as well, would there? Because that's open, providing natural ventilation to that space, or is there a mechanical ventilation for the car park as well?
This is naturally ventilated, so that's correct. There would be a mechanical requirement as well if we were to seal the car park.
I think there's two issues that we're talking about. One is the first option would be to actually, along where the walkway is, the door, put a wall along there and a door at the other end so that your actually entry to the proposal is protected from the garage, if you understand what I mean. So just where that's the darker grey to the lighter grey, so along the wall, the line that goes along there, yeah.
Yeah, I believe there would be issues with BCA compliance.
Because of the shared space.
Because of the shared space, correct.
The shared space, though, is still 3.6 metres wide, excluding that area. I suppose you've got to have the wall thing. It doesn't need to be a wall. It could actually be some sort of semi-open thing, as long as it was sort of protected.
I think LAC has a preference to, like I said, to not make kind of an enclosed space out of this area to stop hoarding and to make sure it is an open, visible. I understand your point with the door being recessed. It would be nice to have it out here. It just isn't something that's necessarily achievable given the location of the accessible space and the requirements of the BCA.
Okay, so even to do a return and get a door with a return, you don't think would be able to be achieved?
We'll still have to have this as just open. So it would be a door to nowhere, essentially.
Yeah. Because it's also the other concern was just from the streetscape was just the sort of extent of the sort of gaping hole in the building as well. All right. So it was just trying to get more of a, not such a large opening.
Yeah, I guess it is slightly larger than a basement dive, but not significantly when you go along the streetscape. A dive into a basement has a similar profile, probably about that width.
Okay. Other questions?
No more questions.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you. So the next, that concludes that matter. The next item is 201 to 207 Carrington Road, Coogee, and we have an objector, Mr. Trevor Zabao, if you're there. Have we got the objector?
Yes, Mr. Zabel is online. He just has to unmute himself, please. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today as an impacted party of the proposed Carrington Road development. I'm joint owner-occupier with my wife, Deborah, of 34 Melody Street, Coogee, and I speak also on behalf of my neighbours at 32 and 30 Melody Street, the Thomas and Smagorinsky families. Our homes are situated directly to the rear of the planned Carrington Road complex, east and southeast. At the outset, we retained the services of a consultant planner, Mr. Tony Moody, to assist us in identifying the potential impacts. I note he wasn't available today. Mr. Moody commenced constructive communication with the developer on our behalf, but the following issues remain unresolved relating to privacy and geotechnical. Firstly, the privacy issues. These result from a line of sight to our properties from the proposed eastern and southern units. We have requested that cantilevered ledges be provided, which would obstruct direct line of sight from the windows and balconies on the proposed second and third levels. To date, the applicant has suggested planter boxes be placed on the balconies. We consider this inadequate. The applicant has also relied on landscaping to partly alleviate our privacy concerns. We've submitted a report from Matthew Cantwell, Director of Secret Gardens, requesting amendments to the landscaping design. I emphasise this is in addition to, not a substitute for the balcony ledges we've proposed. Secondly, the geotechnical or shoring issues. These, of course, concern potential excavation damage to our properties. We've submitted a report from consulting geotechnical engineering firm Tony Adler and Associates, and this outlines some of the serious issues of concern. These unresolved matters that I've highlighted are referenced in Council's refusal document. I might also add the developer's filing of an application in the Land and Environment Court did take us by surprise. However, I note their assurance to Mr. Moody, and I quote from an email sent by the developer's representative, Mr. Wallace Brudelin, on 19 October, and he says, "We don't believe this will negatively impact on our collaboration with yourselves and your clients, and are happy to continue to work with you to ensure an appropriate outcome." Panel members, in conclusion, my neighbours and I would like it noted that we fully support Council's recommendation to refuse the DA. Even so, we would still be prepared to continue negotiations with the developer should they be so willing. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you. Any questions from panel members? No. All right. So on behalf.
Sorry, Chair. So you were in. What was your address? Sorry.
34 Melody Street, Coogee.
Thank you.
It's just directly to the rear of the complex. In my case, southeast, and my neighbours directly east.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Then on behalf of the applicant, we have Mr. Wallace Brudelin and Mr. Chris Webster. Which one of you is speaking?
Yeah, hi Annalise. It's Chris Webster here from IPM. We're the applicant.
Thank you. So you're here to address Council's report?
Yeah, look, we know that this proposal is now subject to a separate Class 1 appeal. We know Council's comments and their recommendations in this report, and I suppose we just wanted to say that we're intending to work with Council to resolve sort of these key issues during the appeal process.
Okay, so just on that, in terms of working to resolve it, First of all, in terms of the floor space ratio, do you agree with council's calculation or not?
We don't in respect of the corridors. We believe they've been designed as open breezeways, which is in accordance with sort of recent court precedents. We do in respect of the additional 10% FSR.
And in terms of council's concerns about the exceedance of the FSR and the overall bulk of the development and the typology being one where it should be more read as two separate buildings, is that something that you're prepared to look at, or is it more like doing things such as privacy screening, those sorts of things?
Look, I think as part of this separate appeal process, and I'm sure we'll be speaking to council fairly soon on that. We're looking at a revised scheme to look at sort of privacy and overshadowing impacts to the neighbours. We don't agree with council's comments on the two block layout, which is referenced in their DCP. That DCP refers to a number of different site planning configurations, and the two block layout is one that isn't sort of applicable to this type of site, being a site that doesn't have a rear lane access and isn't on steep land. But we are looking at other massing changes to address overshadowing and privacy. So we're working on a scheme at the moment, and we sort of look forward to meeting with council shortly to work through that.
Okay, so as I understand it, the extent of your changes would not be any significant reduction in floor space ratio. It would be more changes to, as you say, address privacy and overshadowing.
Look, we may look at that. I suppose initially we're trying to address the impacts initially, and then we'll sort of work through the other issues as they come up with council.
Okay, I suppose what I'm getting at is in terms of your application, we can see that it's got obviously some good features to it, and if it wasn't before the court, then it would be more looking at whether there's opportunity to through a deferral to actually reach a solution. But I think from what you're saying, it's probably better that it just go through the court process. Is that your opinion?
Look, we started that process, so I think so. We are also of the opinion that it's a good proposal. The setbacks are sort of more generous than required, and we think the impacts are acceptable. And on the basis that it have been an amalgamation of 4 properties, which is sort of rare and not probably not reflective of sort of the setback requirements. We think it is a good proposal, but look, we're happy to sort of work with council during this appeal process to address those key issues.
All right. Any questions from other panel members?
I just think on that question of the FSR and the breezeways, I'm very familiar with the landmark case. Is that the one you're referring to?
It is, yeah.
Well, I was actually a planner in that, and for the council, and these corridors are very, very similar. So I do beg to differ with you on that issue of the FSR.
Okay, look, we'll take that on board, and we'll kind of have a look at that, and yeah, I suppose respond to that when we're working with council.
All right. Any other questions?
No more questions.
No. All right. Thank you very much. So that concludes that matter. The next item is 31 Park Street, Clovelly. We have no objectors registered to speak, and we have Ms. Juliet Such on behalf of the applicant.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to address you today. Can I share my screen? I've just got a quick presentation.
Sure.
Is that? Can you see that?
Yes.
And can you hear me? Yep, great. Okay, so my name's Juliet Such. I'm a town planner. I'm working with the owners, Mr. and Mrs. Chilek, and the architect Mary Ellen Hudson's with us today and available to answer any questions you might have. Council's planner, Ms. Huang, has prepared a comprehensive assessment, and we ask that you endorse her recommendation for approval subject to conditions. The site is, and in fact the locality is one with a complex topography due to its coastal location. As illustrated, the character of the neighbourhood is one of older buildings being modernised and extended or replaced with new stock. And while the exhibited plans were consistent with these local recent approvals, there were a number of submissions received and Council also raised several concerns. As a result, the proposal was substantially modified, and in particular, the rear setback is proposed to be maintained in line with the existing building to mitigate view impacts. It complies with the objectives of Council's controls and is generally compliant with the numeric controls. The dwellings at 33 and 35 Park Street obtain views across the site, and some changes are proposed which will impact that view corridor. These changes have been assessed in accordance with the tenacity planning principle, and they've been found to be both minimal and reasonable. There's an existing elevated ground floor rear timber deck. It has a retractable awning and a glazed balustrade. It's proposed to replicate the existing deck in size and setback, and Council has recommended an appropriate condition of consent to this effect. The deck is also proposed to be raised in height by just 200 millimetres due to a minor change in the floor to ceiling height at basement level, and the retractable awning will be replaced with a fixed awning located 600 mil higher in the view line. In this 3D image of the proposed development, within the view from 33 Park Street, you can see the proposed changes are minimal. A condition of consent is recommended to ensure that the 2 additional columns required for structural integrity are no wider than 150 millimetres. The glazing will be replaced with brass rods to the existing 1 metre in height. The brass rods will enhance the views through the deck as they will not get dirty, and because the dimension of the verticals is consistent and minimal, allowing the eye to focus on the view beyond rather than the details of the balustrade. The existing opaque glazing at the southern end of the deck was the subject of a formal agreement between the neighbours. The deck proposed is as per the existing, and it's appropriate to rely on the existing agreement. Consequently, Council have recommended a condition of consent to ensure this occurs. In conclusion, the proposed development will have a reasonable and acceptable impact on the view corridor. It will have an acceptable impact on privacy and sun access to adjoining dwellings, and we respectfully request that the panel endorse Council's recommendation and approve the proposed development subject to the conditions proposed.
Thank you. So just in relation to the conditions, you're happy with the conditions? You've got no issues with that? Yes. The privacy issues. And just on that, that in the picture we've got in the screen now, the window that's adjoining the deck to the rear, that's being enlarged. But as I understand
south-facing window?
I haven't got it.
It's at the ground level.
Do you want to just put that image back up?
I think it is the south-facing window.
I don't think I showed this one. But
it's the south-facing window.
Yeah. So
this one, can you see that?
Not yet, but probably not yet.
It was visible on the conclusion page. Yeah, that one.
Yeah, it was just on the last page. Yes, I think that's probably
that
it.
One. Yeah, that one.
Yeah,
that's the view from the window, and this is the plan.
So it's being enlarged both in terms of it's going up higher and it's going wider.
Slightly wider. 150 mil on either side.
Yeah, so
it's
in terms
almost the extent of the reveal.
All right, and so in terms of what it's looking out on, it's looking over a roof. So it's not as if there's no. Yeah. Okay, just clarifying that.
It's the dining area too. So it's where people will be seated rather than standing at the window as per the existing arrangement where it's a kitchen bench.
Okay, but in terms of you getting access to the view from that, it's really the 2 panes to the left that give you the view as opposed to the one that gives you the view of the
block.
The block of flats. But as you said, it's not a privacy thing. All right, any other questions from panel members? No? All right, well, that concludes that matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next matter is 2R Baden Street, Coogee. And we have Councillor Kathy Nielsen speaking first.
Thank you, Chair. I realise the matter under consideration today is the ancillary advertising. The fact that the approval has been given to a vehicle charging station is unfortunate, considering the close proximity to the council charging station, less than a 2-minute drive away at 97 Brook Street, Coogee. I strongly disagree with the recommendation for approval of the proposed signage. The key issue relates to the impact of the advertising signage on the amenity and visual quality of the surrounding area. It certainly will not achieve a high level of design quality within the streetscape and is surely not appropriate for the adjacent parkland setting. The proposed signage is visual pollution and therefore out of character with the surrounding area being Dunningham Reserve, which encourages a respect and enjoyment of the natural environment. How ironic that the signage is proposed on the eastern facade, faces the park, and the southern facade faces the beach. Imagine picnicking in the park and becoming happily entranced by the dwell time of an image which will be no less than 10 seconds, which will operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I believe it does not comply with the non-compliance with the aims of the RLEP 2012, 1.2, I and J. The proposed signage will definitely have an adverse impact on the scenic and visual qualities of the adjacent parkland and the coastal foreshore. In the Statement of Environmental Effects and Heritage Assessment by the applicant on page 7, they don't even know where they are and refer to the subject site being opposite 88 Beach Street, when in fact it's opposite 126 Beach Street. It is extremely disappointing that in the conditions of consent under the luminance levels, and I quote, the digital panel should be mounted, screened and directed in such a manner that it does not create a nuisance to surrounding properties or the public road network. What about the reserve? Surely the night creatures, including the foxes, do not have to be disturbed by this constant changing visual pollution every night of the year. Night lighting like this toward the reserve should be disallowed. This proposal is definitely not in the public interest. This location is not a suitable location at the end of a dead-end street, which is very busy as a delivery location. I note the matter was supposed to come to the Traffic Committee. I don't believe it did. Advertising should not be approved on this Ausgrid kiosk. I urge the panel to refuse the application.
Thank you. Any questions from panel members? No, thank you. The next speaker is Councillor Lindsay Shuri.
Hi, Annalise. Thank you for letting me speak. I agree with everything that Councillor Nielsen said, but one of my points is that I think it's the thin end of the wedge. We already have visual pollution with our bus stops, which actually provides nothing for the traveller. They don't provide sunshade or even, shelter from the rain, but all they are is an advertising vehicle. And this is exactly the same. And I think that 24 hours of turning signage is just over the top. And I say it's the thin end of the wedge because this company feel that they've approached Ausgrid to do this on many of their their stations around the city. So this can be happening anywhere, and it will continue to happen. It will just be rolled out, just like the bus stops, where we had no, and it's privatizing a public parking space. It's currently parking for the public to use the beach. They're taking that. They put the EV parking station in. Yes, I'm all for EV, but it's advertising. It's an advertising space, really. So I mean, that's my major complaint. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one question to either of the councillors. The Councillor Nielsen, you mentioned that there's a council charging station 2 minutes drive away. Do council, are that your stations free or do you charge, or how do they operate?
Could you say it again? Sorry.
The council charging stations, are they free or how do they operate? How do they work?
You have to pay, but you do not have to be a member of a particular charging group. So like anybody can come and use the charging station with some sort of authorization, but it's not as totally associated with a particular.
So it's a bit like a parking meter where you just go and put some money in with your credit card. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's much more user friendly, and also too, because it is so close to this particular location, we've also got 2 spots there, and also you can actually wait while somebody else might be charging or drive around the block. You can imagine this one is like a total nightmare if you're waiting to be charging your vehicle. It might be okay if you get that spot, but anywhere else, if you're waiting, you're going to be blocking the access to basically the road and the delivery.
And is it normally something that takes 20 minutes, half an hour to do your 50K charging?
Yeah, you'd say most of the people would be at least a half an hour, yes.
And just roughly, do you know how much it costs, or just out of interest?
I don't know. It's not very expensive. It's not an exercise that the expense would be putting you off. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. Yes.
Yes. I guess again to either your councillors, I guess in terms of the rollout of these, that'd be inevitably, I think, mostly on roads either owned by RMS or council. And so it'll need owners' consent, and the something council staff mightn't be aware of in terms of preparing any policy document or guidance for this type of use. Has there been any contemplation of the council meeting of preparing any policy for this type of use that we as the panel should be aware of, the council staff mightn't be aware of?
I think you're probably best to ask the council officers, but a lot of these policies are state policies, not just individual council. We can, tinker with them a little bit to suit what suits us best in terms of our location. But in our area, there are 5 electric charging stations that are available to anybody who's basically got an electric vehicle anyway. So we are probably far more pro encouraging people to have electric charging vehicles, and it seems to be far common now for people to have charging stations that if they live in an apartment complex, there'll be one charging station in their parking complex underground, and it's apparently becoming increasingly inexpensive for people who can drive in off the street to put in their own little charging station.
Good, thank
you. Yeah.
It definitely hasn't been discussed at a council meeting as yet, but we do have in our environmental strategy that we are rolling out these 4 EV charging stations.
All right, thank you. Objector is Mr. Michael Olive, if you're there. You're on mute, Mr. Olive. We still can't hear you. No. I'll go to the next objector, which is Wendy Freeman, and Mr. Olive, you try and work out your sound. So, Ms. Freeman.
Thank you very much, Annalise, and the rest of the panel. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'll try and be absolutely speedy. My name is Wendy Freeman. I've lived in Coogee, exactly opposite where the kiosk is, at the bottom end of Beach Street, right on the corner of Beach Street and Brim Street in the old Art Deco building there, which actually on page 225 is a photo of it. And I want to say that the kiosk at the moment, as all kiosks are well camouflaged. The kiosk is camouflaged in dark green paint, so it sits behind a large tree, which is wonderful. Nobody even notices it's there. On page 228 of your documents, there's a picture of how it will be. I am a strong believer in any initiatives to curb climate change, and certainly EVs will be the choice of my next vehicle. And I'm more than glad to see all the initiatives coming up for EV charging stations, particularly the Tri-Council initiative of Randwick, Waverley and Wahroonga in 2018, which Councillor Nielsen, then Mayor, launched. This is an overall network coordination structure so that we actually do the job properly. Regarding JOLT's statement of environmental effects and Randwick Council's assessment, and looking at with a tooth comb all the RLEP and the DCP and the foreshore assessment, one can only come to the conclusion that this is forcing a square peg into a round hole. The location of this kiosk is bang maybe 5 yards outside the foreshore scenic protection area and against a heritage listed wall leading on to the parkland and the headland there and the coastal walkway and the beach. So I guess my argument falls particularly in 2 points of the schedule, the SEP 64 schedule on page 235 and 236 of your documents, where it says ensure signage is compatible with desired amenity and visual character of the area. And look, with all the work that can be put into finding loopholes in these documents and instruments, it's clearly not the right place. We have to be careful not to introduce more rabbits into the system. Look, we need charging stations. That's wonderful. This is really the wrong place. I speak because it won't implicate me at all. I'm fortunate to live right opposite the beach, and quite honestly, it won't make any difference to me. However, I do feel a strong responsibility to act as a guardian for the thousands of people who come to the beach, accessing it from the north end, and who do not need to be inflicted with advertising in this special spot. It's actually in the RE1, the public recreation area, and 10 metres from where the foreshore scenic protection area is the boundary line. The other point in SEP 64 on page 236 of your document, it asks the character of the area. Is it compatible with existing or desired future character? And I know Randwick has got a visionary document coming up for 2040, and we really have to be so careful and so wise in how we allow development to take place and not to open a can of worms that can lead to destructive and pollutive elements in this very beautiful part of Sydney. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from panel members? No, thank you. Mr. Olive, can we hear you now? No, we still can't hear you. Do you have speakers that you can put in?
Now at all?
Yeah, now we can hear you. We can hear you now. You've done.
Oh,
something.
okay. Yeah, all right. So that must have been the problem. Okay, yes. I'll be arguing against the proposed advertising, and I'm got to say that I'm an EV owner and very much in favour of EV charging stations that are part of a network plan. I want to put forward, some my understanding of JOLT's proposition, that JOLT Charge is proposing to add an ancillary third-party digital advertising to its electric vehicle charging station. The advertising is a profit-making venture by itself, and the EV charging station will go ahead even if there's no advertising. The DA report executive summary makes two cases for ancillary advertising. One, the advertising signage is required for identification of the EV charging facility. Clearly, this is not true. Randwick Council have a network of unmistakable charging stations without advertising on them. Second, EV owners know where they are because of company charging apps. And third, the advertising here, as many have said, will be facing away from vehicles. The second case that they make is that advertising is needed to cover for 7 kilowatts of free charging. Is this true? Have revenue and profit projections been carried out by council? Why 7 kilowatts free? Might owners be there for longer than 15 minutes? I'd say probably, to fully charge. It takes nearly 2 hours to charge my Leaf at that kilowatt rate of 25 kilowatts per hour. And 7 kilowatts could be still part of a marketing strategy. Other EV charging companies offer deals to entice customers in different ways. The DA report executive summary cites one case against ancillary advertising, the impact of the illuminated advertising signage on the amenity and visual quality of the surrounding area. I'll make this case. Advertising is insistent. It wants something from us, and illuminated advertising is designed to catch the eye. This is why we don't have advertising in our coastal parks. We need a break from the rat race. What exists at the moment is a green boxy substation. It's passive, normalised and hardly noticed. The proposed illuminated advertising, in contrast, will catch the eye of many frequenting Dunningham Reserve and the coastal walk. 8.1 of the report says, when viewed from Cunningham Reserve to the east, the advertising will be viewed against the backdrop of the on-street parking area and the shops and the associated businesses and retail signage along Beach Street. The point is that on-street parking, the shops, etc., are much further back, and the proposed advertising will be right on the border and shining into the reserve. There is no doubt who it's aimed at. We can add that there's little advertising or no other illuminated advertising in that business area. Therefore, the proposal is unreasonable. Another argument against the advertising is precedence. In response to a submission, the report replies, the proposed signage only relates to existing electrical infrastructure and unlikely to establish an undesirable precedent. There's no justification given for this statement, and I would say that we're looking at a cookie-cutter business model for EV charging stations here. Why is a similar substation next to the park at the other end of Beach Street? Why won't that one be next? Also, we can look at similar. The business model is similar to the one that Telstra is using, advertising on the back of free phone booths. It's just working its way through the system. And is that what we want? And I'll finish by saying that electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging stations are coming, but we have to have proper planning to avoid undesirable outcomes such as this advertising proposal. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I just see any questions? No, thank you very much, Mr. Olive.
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry, Deborah.
Sorry if I missed it, but if you've got an EV, how much does it charge to cost your charge? How much does it cost you to charge your car for the 50 kilometres of 7 kilowatts? Do you know?
Well, that depends where you're doing it. If you're doing it in your home and under, I'm with Power Shop, that's about 7 cents a kilowatt, so that's about 50 cents. But if you're doing it with ChargeFox, which the council partner with at that charging station, sort of in Brook Street, at different times they may charge 25 cents, so that brings you up to $1.85 or $1.75. But they have special deals. I know I have a Nissan Leaf, and we got free charging through ChargeFox for the first year. So, and NRMA do a lot of free charging. So there are different deals that are done, and there are sort of different forms of marketing that organisations do to attract customers. And so,
if it was full on-going rate, it'd be about $1.75. $1.75 for the 7 kilowatts, take you 50 kilometres in one of these sorts.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Any other questions? No, this is just from panel members. Thank you. So we have the applicant, on behalf of the applicant, Ms. Jenny Askin and Mr. Andrew Gianaska. Which one is speaking?
Okay, I'll be speaking this afternoon, Chair. So my name's Jenny Askin. I'm the planning consultant acting on behalf of the applicant, and thank you for the opportunity to address you this afternoon. Firstly, we welcome the recommendation for approval, and we raise no objection to the conditions as they're recommended to be imposed. In terms of the objections received and the representations this afternoon, I believe that these have been adequately discussed in the report, but I'd just like to reiterate some of the comments that have been made. The signage display is fully compliant with the Outdoor Media Association digital signage policy in terms of dwell times, luminance and content. And I note that at night time, the brightness or the illumination of the signage will go down depending on the surrounding illumination. So the darker it is, the less bright it is. The signage is to the eastern and southern panel facing away from nearby residential properties. And as you look at it, there is the backdrop of retail and residential buildings and the street. I do note that the kiosk is not located in the foreshore area or within the park. I understand that the panel have been provided with a video, and this demonstrates that the advertising is within the profile of the Ausgrid structure as it's approved to be modified, and it will not have an impact on the visual amenity of the locality. The proposal, as it's been discussed today, is providing a public benefit in terms of a facility for EV charging, and it's utilising some existing infrastructure that's available on our streets. The structure uses a spiritor mechanism, which automatically tightens the charging cable so that it doesn't drag on the ground and become a trip hazard, and this will automatically retract when not in use, and the cable does not cross the footpath. With respect to SEP 64, the proposal as set out in the report is consistent with the aims of the policy, noting that the digital panels are part of the casing to the existing structure. They will not dominate or obscure views. In terms of Schedule 1 of the SEP, advertising will not obscure views of the foreshore, will not dominate the skyline, does not protrude above surrounding buildings or structures, and illumination is as per the current regulations. As confirmed in the report, the proposal satisfies the LEP and DCP requirements, and on this basis is acceptable in terms of Section 4.15 of the Act and the objects of the Act. There is also a representative from Jolt here today, so between us both, hopefully we can answer any questions or concerns that you have.
Thank you. I think we've got a few questions. First of all, I'll start. So in terms of it being ancillary, can you just explain, I think what you said, what in the report says it's ancillary because it's smaller than the area of the Ausgrid station.
Yes. It also relates to the use. So obviously the primary use of the structure is EV charging, and then the advertising is ancillary to that use.
Sorry, the primary structure is the Ausgrid.
So the primary use of the structure itself is for EV charging, and then the advertising is ancillary to that primary use.
All right, but I'm just trying to understand because the structure is what's been approved under Part 5, the EV charging.
That's correct.
It's on an Ausgrid structure.
That's correct. So it's encasing over the existing kiosk, but its use is for EV charging, and that's been identified as the primary use of this facility, of the structure itself. And then the advertising is ancillary to that use.
I'm happy to add into that, Jenny, just on the arrangement with Ausgrid as well. The charging the advertising element or the screens can't exist without the dominant use, which is the EV charging. We use the EV charging, and it's the primary use. The only reason we're on that site is because of that. The screens themselves also have other uses as well. There's an emergency warning system, there's community messaging, there's a portion of Ausgrid's messaging and also Jolt's messaging as well, which is business signage. So the third-party advertising element of it is only just a small part of the overall package.
And just out of interest, the advertising structure was approved under Part 5. Why couldn't the advertising be approved under that? Why have you gone down these two different paths?
Yeah, look, what we've tried to do is consult fairly heavily with council. We've been engaging with council for the best part of 2 years. It was the recommended path from council in the early engagement. So we decided to listen to those requests and move down that pathway. We have had in other instances and other councils where we've actually wrapped up the signage approval with the Part 5, but for this instance, we, in consultation with council, decided to do it as two separate applications.
Okay, and just some of the questions, so we understand, you're going to do 7 kilowatts free, and then after that there'll be a charge, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So 7 kilowatts is equivalent to around about 50 kilometres, which is beyond the average commute on a daily basis for most people in Sydney. So we see that as a top-up for everyone who's running on their way. I think one of the councillors mentioned before that there's an increase in apartment charging, which is only partially true, I would say. There's the cost of infrastructure is enormous to be able to put EV charging within a building. So what we're trying to do is access electric vehicle charging to everyone who wants to buy an electric vehicle. In particular areas, particularly around the Coogee area, a lot of people don't have any access to off-street parking. They may live in a place that doesn't have a car parking bay. They would do their primary charging on Jolt, or obviously council has a commercial agreement with ChargeFox, which is the one that the councillor mentioned. We charge on that one. The more the merrier, really. We need to have a situation where there's more than one charger in an entire suburb for what was projected to be, thousands of EVs over the next coming years. So we're trying to, I guess, front run what we see as a demand in EV charging that's on street, trying to not just rely on at-home charging, but have this on-street charging as well. So anything beyond the 7 kilowatts in Sydney is approximately 40 cents per kilowatt hour, but there will always be the free element, and that's a commercial arrangement between Jolt and Ausgrid, that we have to keep the free element of charging for the entirety of our contract with Ausgrid, which is, well, it's a long time. I can't say exactly how long it is, but it's over a decade. So that's not something that's going to go away. It's not a marketing ploy. Similar to the charge.
But after the 7 kilowatts,
yes,
which is free, it's what, 40 cents? Is that what you said?
40 cents per kilowatt hour. That's correct. So, and that's an optional. The driver can opt in to continue the charge if they want to have a full charge. What we find in our network is that some people without off-street parking will go for the full charge and maybe top up once every 2 weeks. People who just want a free top-up as they go along their daily commute will get the free charge and then just move on. So they'll get that 7 kilowatts per customer per day.
And just in terms of the facing where the signs face, they face east and south. And as I understand it, you're saying it's needed to, so that cars know that it's there for identification. But why is it on the south side rather than the east side rather than the west side, given the road is on the west?
Yeah, look, and that was just an early configuration that we put there, and we're happy to work with council to reconfigure the screens if there isn't a more appropriate direction. Ideally on the short side facing up the hill is actually a good option for us as well. And we can configure our module to sit the screens wherever we would like and wherever council approves them to be. So that's an optional extra, and it was always for discussion with council through this process. If a more appropriate direction is to be facing up the hill on the short side, then we can make that happen. It's sort of up to council, and this is obviously the beauty of having a forum like this to hear people's feedback, but we were thinking that would be away from the residential area, which was beneficial, but from what I'm hearing, it's actually, the desire is to not be facing the park. So that's an option as well that we have in our modular design.
Okay. Panel members, any questions?
Could I just ask questions about the box? The box is quite a bit bigger than the substation. It's 2 metres high and wider.
Yep.
How does that actually work? It sits over the box Why is it bigger, and where does it draws the power from the substation? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a few different parts to that. The first is that the enclosure is completely attached to the base concrete structure of the kiosk. So it protrudes approximately 250 mils off the sides, just because that's where the doors need to be sitting.
So it's half a metre wider than the kiosk?
On one side is 25 and on the other side is 25 centimetres. So yes, it is wider on both sides, and that's to facilitate the doors. The height itself is raised by approximately 400 mils, and that will depend on the site and how low the kiosk sits already. There's a few reasons for that. The first is there's a thermal consideration that we need to be able to let the existing kiosk breathe. It's still obviously an electrical substation. We can't sit the roof directly on the other roof, and it's just the way it's been designed and the way that it'll so we can maintain all the function of the kiosk as it is.
Just jumping in there, why does it need a roof?
It has a perforated roof. The reason for that...
Well, I'm just getting it. Why couldn't it be open at the top, and why does it actually need to be higher than the kiosk?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the reason for the roof is to create rigidity on the structure. So if we were to remove the roof, there'll be nothing to hold up the sides. So a roof is basically, if you look at the roof of our other installations around Sydney, it's a perforated roof that has holes in it to allow it to breathe. And the purpose for the roof is for it to hold the sides together. So it's a design consideration to allow, for the safe use of the structure.
But it could just as easily be done by bracing, surely. I'm just, and they're all the same size?
The structure itself is all the same size? Yeah, that's right. It is the same size. It just depends on how high it sits on the kiosk, depends on how much of the structural slab is exposed to the existing kiosk. A lot of these were from the, obviously from the 50s and 60s. Some of them, sunk down. The one that we're talking about in question, as part of our works, we'll do an upgrade because there's it's full of asbestos basically. So there's an asbestos upgrade that needs to happen, and we'll remove the asbestos and raise the roof, and that's all Ausgrid's work that they'll be doing as part of this.
So if you had a concern about the size of a sign, for example, would there be any reason why you couldn't do a different type of enclosure that was lower? I mean, what I'm trying to get what's driving the size of this thing, and why it needs to be 2 metres high, and is that driven by the advertising panel size?
We can have other sized advertising panels on the panel. It's just a screen. We've gone through obviously a really robust and lengthy design process with Ausgrid to be able to be allowed to attach infrastructure on their infrastructure, and basically the only way that we can achieve the thermal mass that we need to, or thermal considerations, is to have it above the top of the kiosk. There's equipment that also sits in there, including a meter which has particular standards in the way that sits, so it has to stand upright, and other considerations like that. So it's not just for fun. Like, we would make it as small as possible if we could, because we wouldn't have any of these problems, but we have to have it at that size to be able to achieve the engineering considerations mandated by Ausgrid.
So the meter's on the top of the kiosk, is it?
Meter is on a metering shelf that hangs down with the separated switchboard that sits from the roof and hangs above the doors. So if you would open the doors, and all doors open because it's still operational as a kiosk, there's a metering enclosure that sits inside the system. And there's a separated little door that meter readers can come and read the meter. I think there was a question about power coming from the unit. Obviously, we're sitting on top of the transformer, so we have the ability to up-spec the charger inside, so increase the speed over time and actually have 2 charging units on the one unit. We will, in this instance, look at doing a second charging unit down the track if we think that there's demand there for it. So at the moment we have 25 kilowatt chargers. We're already planning to upgrade those to 50 kilowatt and potentially to 100 kilowatt chargers down the track. We can do that because we're sitting on top of the transformer. Council's commercial agreement that they have with ChargeFox, you buy that charger and you have a commercial agreement with them, but you're going to buy that one particular piece of infrastructure. We can upgrade as demand comes forward. So, we have that ability because we're sitting on the transformer, which is the beauty of our arrangement with Ausgrid. But with that comes, size considerations, as we sort of just spoke about. We need to have the room to be able to do that.
And so just one final question. So each one of these boxes has got 2 panels.
That's correct. Yep.
But you said you can move them around, so
it's modular. So like if we want to move, so in this configuration, if we want to put the screens on the 2 long ends or 2 short ends, we can just move the door configuration around. So the screens sit there and the opening concertina doors sit in a different location. The reason for that is that, obviously we've got other sites around Sydney that have already been constructed and some that have already been approved in other council areas. There's just different configurations where the charger will sit and the screens will sit. So we've designed it with that in mind to be able to, move the doors to the appropriate location. So we do have some flexibility in that respect.
Thank you.
Just following on from that, so if you didn't actually have advertising in the structure, would the structure be able to be a different configuration?
The structure wouldn't exist. We wouldn't. There's no way that we would be able to install that without having some sort of other. And look, there's other providers out there that are have a paid model, and you pay quite a lot of money for the charger. We're providing free infrastructure across Sydney and free charging, and part of that is subsidised by the advertising. So without
I'll just interrupt you. That's an economic argument. I'm just talking in terms of the logistical argument, forgetting about who pays, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. If physically you wanted to put an EV structure onto an Ausgrid station kiosk, would the structure be of the same dimensions as what you're proposing?
It would if you were to put an enclosure around the outside, yes. The size has nothing to do with the screens. It's nothing to do with the thermal consideration for the screens. It's to do with putting a structure. The thing that's got thermal consideration within our structure is the charger itself. So there's a charger that sits in there as well in the charge door. The charger itself is a DC 25 kilowatt charger that runs a lot of power from the kiosk. The screens themselves would run the same amount of power as your television in your house. It's not a thermal consideration for that. So the structure would be exactly the same size depending on whether or not you had screens on it or not.
So how big is that charger?
A 25 kilowatt DC fast charger. Yeah.
How
like dimension-wise?
Dimensions. Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's probably 0.5 metre by 0.5 metre and weighs about 100 kilos, 150 kilos.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I've got
Jason.
questions. Thanks.
Sure.
So were you about to say that if you didn't have the signage, then you wouldn't be providing it at all? Is that the case?
That's correct, yes.
So isn't the charging station ancillary to the signage?
No, so that it facilitates the signage. It facilitates the charging. We have to have one without the other. The charger wouldn't be installed by Jolt if we didn't have...
Right. So can I just understand this ancillary argument, though, in terms of a third party? I heard you say earlier that it's a small component of the overall signage. What did you mean by that?
So there's multiple things shown on the screen. There is...
in terms of percentage of time, what time would be third-party advertising?
Oh, that's a good question. Off the top of my head, I don't know the percentage, but we have 6 slots. Sorry?
More than 50% of the time?
At the moment, it wouldn't be, but it could be up to 70%. And it could be, at the moment, we've only got one.
It's in your business interest to maximise that, aren't you? You'd imagine.
That's correct. Yeah, definitely is.
It's cynical about putting it up to put up information about Ausgrid and community information.
Yeah, and look, we have an agreement with, part of our commercial agreement with Ausgrid is to provide a percentage to them for their own use. So Ausgrid's emergency warning and community messaging.
That's 30. The total of all nine at third party is 30%. Is it? That's where the 70% comes in? Or?
Approximately, yeah. It's approximate because there's also an element of community.
So how has that been ancillary? I mean, isn't it the same? I guess the argument is because it's providing funding to provide this, it's ancillary. But couldn't you say that of putting in a unit above a surf club because you sell a unit that helps fund the surf club? It doesn't. If they're independent, if advertising is separate, independent use, just because it helps fund it doesn't make it ancillary.
The only thing I would add is that the advertising is as a result of there being a charging station there. So the principal use of the substation is for the purposes of EV charging. And then obviously the economical side of it is that it's helping to fund that free charging
But you can't use an economic argument to fund something to say it's ancillary because the money's put towards it.
No, but I think the money, that financial side of it is not in the ancillary argument. The fact is that the primary use of the structure is for EV charging. The ancillary use then is advertising. So, and that's from a planning perspective. So you're not going to have this casing just for the purposes of advertising. The casing is actually to facilitate the charging station.
But in that planning circular that characterises development where that ancillary term is used and being separate to an independent use, I'm just still struggling to see how the advertising is not independent of the charging.
But also, why do you need to go down the ancillary argument? Because advertising is permissible in the B1 zone.
Exactly, but we just had some legal advice that it wasn't identified as an ancillary use, but it is permissible in the zone. And we've looked very careful at the zoning of all the stations, the substations that we're looking at, to make sure they're in the business zone or in special uses. And obviously,
so it doesn't need to be ancillary; it's just a permissible use.
That's correct. Yes.
So we don't need to go down that argument.
No, but it has been identified as an ancillary use as well. But
yeah, it's just that I think if we're going down the ancillary, then potentially we've got may have a difference of opinion with that. But I don't know if it needs in this instance we need to go down it because it's permissible within the zone.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Jason, sorry.
And just lastly, I mean, I guess if you're a few metres either way in terms of the open space zone to the east or foreshore area further to the north, and it wouldn't be permissible. So do you accept there's a greater sensitivity of these structures when they're next to a busy park or the foreshore, or you don't see any difference to the location and impact wherever they are?
It is definitely a consideration, and I think Council has identified that it's acceptable in this location, given what the backdrop is as well. I mean, this is a park that I know quite well, and I think the main thoroughfare that you have through there is along the beach and up the path. People obviously sit in the park, but as you look across and you see those residential and retail uses behind and the street, it has that backdrop. So I don't think it's affecting the visual amenity of the locality, and that's what Council have identified as well.
Thank you. No more questions from me.
Any other questions? Yes, Peter?
Just the one. Just thinking about the consent is proposed for 15 years. With technology changing so fast, what's the likelihood that screen will still be suitable for the purpose for 15 years? That's quite a long time with technology.
Yeah, I can answer that one. In reference to the screen itself, we do have the ability to upgrade the screen over time if we were to, if a newer technology emerges. Got quite a long warranty period for that particular screen. It should last for quite a long time, but we would upgrade it as needed. And the same goes for the charging infrastructure. We can as I say, it's modular, so we can upgrade as required in terms of emerging technology and also the plug types as well. So I think that's good to note.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right, so that concludes that item. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Then we have 11A Battery Street, Clovelly, and the objector, Ms. Madeline Marek.
Yes, that's right. So I'll just share my screen. I hope you can see that. So hello, Madeline, and I'm representing the owner of number 15. The alterations and additions to a dwelling house proposal at 11A Battery Street, Clovelly, raises considerable concern regarding overshadowing and visual bulk. Consequently, it will pose an unacceptable impact on the solar access and outlook for the current and future residents of number 15 Battery Street, which lies directly to the east of the development site. In its current form, the proposal creates a permanent censored enclosure for the residents of number 15. This, alongside the overshadowing of critical private open space, is a direct result of a non-compliant rear setback. So the image here I've shared, created with an accurate 3D model, gives you an idea of what the visual impact and additional obtrusive bulk would be from the perspective of 15 Battery Street. If the upper floor rear setback was aligned with that at 15, the property would still be able to accommodate for a spacious family home, and the solar access and outlook for the eastern neighbour could be retained. Aligning the upper floor rear setback would also allow for the proposal to comply with the applicable rear setback control of the Randwick DCP, specifically the section that requires development to adhere to the existing predominant rear setback line, subject to urban block. If I just go down to this block analysis we've prepared, it shows that there is indeed an established upper floor rear setback pattern along the northern side of Battery Street, which the proposal, lined in red, severely strays from. So matching the average upper floor rear setback would reduce the issues of overshadowing and visual bulk, and would prevent the development from creating a devastating precedent of overdevelopment in the R2 zone for the adjoining properties on Battery Street. The reason we are appealing to the panel today is because we know that a simple adjustment of setback and minor internal reconfiguration to suit can overcome the issues raised, and we ask that a condition be placed upon the consent to require that. Thank you.
All right, so just so I understand, you're saying that the upper level there's a consistent rear setback, but and as I understand, council's assessment has based it on the rear setback at ground level. Is that the difference of opinion? Why council says there isn't a consistent rear setback?
That's correct. I believe council said there isn't a consistent rear setback. However, we can see that there is, especially with 15, 17 and 9, as well as if you go a little further down the street. And at the moment, they have that setback lined in red to the ground floor, and the first floor is going to match that.
All right, thank you. Any other questions from panel members?
Sorry, so is that how far further setback would you say that would need to be then?
We're suggesting for it to be brought in line with 9 and 15. Sorry, I just closed the share screen. To be brought in line with the adjoining properties.
Do you know what that is?
Roughly that is, many metres roughly that is?
Looks about 6 or so, about the same as the front setback models.
Yeah, I don't have the exact measurement there. Perhaps Peter Marshall.
Yeah, I'm the owner at 15. I can probably roughly answer that. I think it would be about 6 metres, approximately, back to being level with my house at number 15 and my neighbour at 17.
All right. Any other questions? Deborah, did you have another question?
No, I think that's... Oh, the parking. Oh, sorry, no, that's all right. Is the applicant speaking?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. And Mr. Masterman, you're not speaking. It was just Ms. Marriott was speaking on your behalf.
I was going to have Ms. Marriott speak on my behalf.
Yep.
She's basically covered what my issue is with the DA. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So on behalf of the applicant, we have Mr. Eli Schleiman. Is that right?
Yep. Eli Schleiman, yeah.
Eli Schleiman, thanks.
Hi, my name is Eli Schleiman. I'm the Director of ES Planning, and I'm here to speak in support of the application at 11A Battery Street, Clovelly. At the conception phase of this project, a very detailed site analysis was carried out before any detailed design work was initiated. During the preliminary planning stage, it was observed that there wasn't a predominant rear setback within the immediate locality. This inconsistency in rear setback doesn't mean that an applicant should blatantly ignore rear setbacks and simply apply the minimum 8-metre setback stipulated within council's planning controls. Blindly following numerical controls brings with it a detriment to planning outcomes. As an example, it is noted that in standard planning practice, especially with narrow east-west facing lots, it is a disservice to the amenity of the neighbouring dwellings to have your rear built form protruding past your neighbour's dwelling, as this obstructs much needed direct solar access. In these situations with east-west facing narrow lots, regardless of predominant rear setback, proposing a built form past the neighbouring dwelling to the south leads to a poor planning outcome. The property before the planning panel today is not an east-west facing lot, but rather a north-south facing lot, and as such allows all neighbouring dwellings to achieve an abundant amount of solar access. It is important to note that this built form protruding past the existing neighbouring dwelling does not come at a detriment to the amenity of the neighbour. 3D elevational shadows have been provided with the submission to demonstrate that more than a reasonable level of amenity has been maintained to the neighbouring dwellings. On a similar note, the first floor built form doesn't start at the closest possible front setback position. The first floor is recessed back to enable a neighbouring semi to feel like a pair and fit in harmoniously with the existing streetscape. This level of care and detail is seen throughout the proposal before the panel of experts here today. Battery Street is a very unique street. It is unique because apart from being a very narrow street, there is only parking along the southern side of the street, halving the available on-street parking. Because of Battery Street's parking availability is absolutely saturated, and the street is screaming for parking spaces. In normal situations, placing a wide vehicular crossover is detrimental to on-street parking availability. However, due to the uniqueness of the street and the inability to park on the north side of the street, it is advantageous for not only the subject site, but for the immediate locality, as it relieves Battery Street of on-street parking demand. Australian standards for off-street car parking facilities only requires a width of 7.5 metres for 3 spaces, leaving a buffer of approximately 1.4 metres clear of parking spaces for pedestrian access and additional soft landscaping. For these reasons, I encourage the planning panel to delete conditions 2C from the proposed consent, allowing 3 car parking spaces to park within the front setback. This is in keeping with many of the properties along the northern side of Battery Street. Another condition that we seek to delete is the need to lower the swimming pool area. This is condition 2E of the proposed consent. The pool area at the rear is proposed to remain at the same level as the rear deck. The stepping down of this area disrupts the flow of an already small private open space. In order to optimise the amenity of this home, I encourage the planning panel of experts to reconsider the need for this condition. The raised fence height has minimal impacts to the neighbours and represents a height similar to that of a typical 450mm lattice that is placed on many neighbouring fences. Due to the orientation of the site, this raised fence has minimal solar impacts to the neighbours. For these reasons, and on a balance of amenity impacts, I encourage the deletion of condition 2E. Mr. Joseph Farag, Council's Environmental Planning Officer, provides strong support of the application. The plans which are before the panel of experts today represents a response to the neighbouring objections that were raised in the first letter of assessment. Further to this, the proposed conditions of consent add privacy screens and remove building bulk. This has resulted in further increased neighbouring amenity and further addresses the neighbourhood concerns. I hope that today's panel of experts feel the same way and support my client's home and move to delete conditions 2C and 2E. If any of the panel members have any questions, I'll be more than happy to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
I have a couple.
Yes.
Just to read the length of the building. There's the roof overshoots at the rear too, and with sidewalls to enclose that rear balcony at first floor. Given there is a concern about the length, that could actually be cut back, that roof, couldn't it, and just have a normal awning?
Yeah.
Weather protection.
Yeah, one of the actual conditions of consent requests that lightweight louvers are actually applied to that, so that will relieve the actual bulk that we're seeing. The other thing is too, the image that was sent removed all windows from and created sort of a more of a bulkier feel to the look of the building.
But there's no reason why the roof, that high-pitched roof, has to be there. That could just simply be a awning of some sort, couldn't it?
It could
you wouldn't have that height and that bulk then.
Yeah, I mean it could be. It could be. I mean, yeah.
Okay, and assuming you didn't get your way and you were only allowed to have the 2 spaces, where would you prefer those 2 spaces to be? On the existing crossover with a slightly widened, or where you've shown the 2 in front of the house?
Pretty much where we've shown the 2 in front of the house. I'm proposing to remove there's like a little low wall that sort of blocks off the 2 spots. So just removing that because Australian standards needs wider spaces when there's obstructions. So by removing that, you sort of reduce the car parking width need by 600 mil.
Yeah, but assuming you only allowed 2 spaces.
Yep.
Would you put the 2 in front of the house, or do you put them where the existing crossover is, slightly widened?
2 in front of the house works, and 2 to where the existing crossover works. It probably works better.
No, but just going back to my question is, if you were only allowed 2,
yeah,
where would you put them?
I'd put them in front of the house.
Okay.
So you'd get rid of the existing crossover
and convert that to landscaping. Yeah.
Yeah, correct.
Any other questions? No. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the last item is 26 Powell Street, Coogee, and we have Mr. Bruce McLennan speaking.
Hi, thanks very much. I just hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and the members of the panel for your time today. My name is Bruce McLennan. My wife and I own and reside at 24 Powell Street, Coogee, with our young family. Our property is the only property that shares a common boundary with 26 Powell Street, and I strongly oppose this inappropriate development application to build a 2-storey detached dual occupancy on this site. A significant number of our neighbours also strongly object. We engaged Milestone Town Planning to write the report, which I understand the panel members received in advance of this meeting. Look, the proposal is inappropriate and unprecedented. There are no 2-storey detached dual occupancy developments in Powell Street or Melody Street, and there are no houses fronting Melody Lane. There is a consistent and established pattern of semi-detached and detached homes fronting the street, with modest gardens and secondary dwellings fronting Melody Lane, as you can see on the screen. And these low-scale ancillary structures are usually garages. There are only 1 or 2 properties with a studio above the garage. This proposal represents overdevelopment. I mean, in constructing a 2 large 4-bedroom detached homes, the applicant is essentially building a second house in their rear garden. And the site is 457 square metres. The proposal is to only have 4.7 metres of separation between the 2 proposed dwellings, and the site is just too small for the proposed development. Each dwelling will have a very small outdoor space and a lot of overshadowing, and the development would read from Power Lane like a Torrens title subdivision, and the proposal would result in excessive intensification of the site and an inappropriate built form outcome for the locality. It would also create an obtrusive inconsistency with a well-maintained streetscape. Look, we are passionate about the architecture and the amenity of our street and the local area, which will be permanently degraded by this proposed development. We've renovated our 100-year-old home at significant cost and effort to ensure we maintain the charming streetscape, for which Randwick Council recognised our efforts with an Architecture and Urban Design Award in 2015. But we understand the applicant's desire to redevelop their site, but this proposal completely disregards the existing local character and the site context interface with its only direct neighbour. And we're really pleased, in fact very relieved, that Council's development application report recommends refusing this development application. We agree with the report that the proposed development is, and I quote, inconsistent and incongruous with the desired future character of the local area and will not protect the amenity of the local residents. And I note that Council has many key issues for refusing the development, but however, my legitimate concerns for this proposal centres around dwelling B. Its location on the site, its excessive bulk, its visual impact and its impact on amenity. And my concerns not just for my family home, but also for our neighbours and the future of developments in our area. The approval of a 2-storey detached dual occupancy will set a damaging, irreversible precedent. And while I wish to remain respectful of Council, I must advise, as you can see from the photo, I must advise the panel, there is no question my home will suffer unreasonable loss of visual and acoustic privacy and a visual impost due to the adverse bulk, position and scale of dwelling B. So finally, the report by Council indicates that Council has made recommendations to the applicant to redesign the proposed development. which they have declined to do. And I would request that the Chair ask the applicant why they have declined to resign, if that's possible. And in summary, we fully support Council's recommendation to refuse this application. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Any questions? No. The next objector is Ms. Alice Kalambokos.
Yes, thank you for your time. So I concur with the previous speaker. Absolutely, I am one of the nearby properties. But in addition to what he has said, I would like to emphasise the complete loss of parking space that this particular property will create. Someone has made complaints to council about the corners of Melody Lane, Mount Lane, Powell Street and Powell Lane, which have ended up in no stopping signs all along that strip. There are far more dangerous positions in Coogee that require no stopping, and there are none there. And so we have already lost substantial parking spaces in this area. To allow a 2 driveway access for this particular property, which no other property has, on Powell Street or Melody Lane or Mount Lane for that matter, because the back's onto Mount Lane as well, I think that allowing this property to proceed will set a precedent for this dual access driveway, which will ultimately, if everybody was allowed to do that on these streets, there would be absolutely no street parking left. There are already people who have driveways and they don't use them. This street objected to having a permit parking system to allow them to be forced to use their driveways or garages. So if they had more driveways that weren't getting used and less parking space available to all of the nearby residents, that apartment blocks that need them, then we would have a very serious parking issue in this area.
All right, thank you. Any questions? No. Now the applicant, Mr. Tony Carey.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. I act on behalf of the owners. May I say at the outset that this land is zoned R3 medium density zone with the specific objectives of allowing a variety of housing forms, of which a dual occupancy is one of those forms. We submit that the recommended refusal in this case is in fact seriously flawed. It's inconsistent with the report that Council has written, and it's unsupported by fact. We request that the proposal be approved on the basis that, in fact, it is compliant with the objectives and the provisions of the LEP, and it is compliant with all bar 2, I think, of the relevant development control provisions as set out in Council's report. Referring to the 5 reasons for refusal, Council's own report directly contradicts refusal items 1, 4 and 5. On page 325, the report notes that the proposal is not inconsistent with the zone and its objectives. With respect to reason 4, on page 326, the report notes that the proposal satisfies the relevant objectives and controls of the DCP. With respect to reason 5, section 8 concludes in black and white that the proposal is in the public interest. Reasons 2 and 3 are linked to the conflict of a proposed driveway with a minor stormwater pipe and the potential for that driveway to adversely impact an existing significant tree. With respect to the driveway, I refer you to an email from Council's drainage engineer to Mr. McCaffrey, which we have included in our written submission to you, which states in short, you can relocate the outlet converter to either side of, you can relocate the outlet converter to either side of the existing tree. I understand that no work is required in the drip line of the tree to do that. Regarding the palm tree and the significance and the potential impact of the palm tree, advice from Council's Landscape Development Officer, which is noted within Council's report, states, a combination of the setback and finished levels described above means it appears feasible to proceed with this crossing in this case, and it recommends some minor safeguards to protect the tree during those works. The final issue noted in the Council's assessment then is the orientation of the proposed open space. The assessing officer dismisses the location of the private open space as, I quote, an afterthought and does not reflect either the site conditions or seek to maximise the usability of those areas by the occupants. Quite to the contrary, Chair, the owners have lived on this site since 2006, and in fact, Amanda's family have owned the site for over 90 years. It is through their lived experience that they have specifically located the private open space as proposed on the opposite side of the block because any northern options are severely compromised by the design, siting and usage of the large two-storey dwelling immediately adjacent to the northern boundary, the earlier speaker. So the privacy, acoustic and visual of both the neighbour and my client would be affected by locating open space on the north side. Proposed dwelling A would be in complete shadow in winter, effectively creating a two-storey canyon if the private open space was to be located on the north, with obviously no amenity or functionality. A north side private open space for dwelling B would have minimal visual or acoustic privacy as a result of the overshadowing of the adjoining property, a direct overlooking from the first floor of that adjoining property, and the immediate proximity of the ground floor deck of the home to the north. It's not a good outcome for either property owner. The proposed private open space locations eminently satisfy all the other relevant objectives of that DCP element, and in my opinion are a superior solution to any possible locations on the north side. I understand people, and we all are the same, are concerned about change, but this proposal is demonstrably compliant with the objectives and the provisions of the LEP and the overwhelming majority of the DCP provisions as reported by Council's report. Noting the minor compliance with respect to the private open space, the DCP states, where a DA does not comply with the DCP, the consent authority must be flexible in its application and consider reasonable alternative solutions to achieve the objectives. We believe this proposal is compliant with all relevant controls in the environmental planning instruments. We note that there were a number of submissions which the officer has reviewed and I think has found only one issue that was relevant relating to the private open space, and therefore we cannot see any legitimate reason to refuse this application, and so respectfully request that the panel grant approval to the project. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions?
Nobody wants. I've just got one. Under the DCP, well, going back a step, the dwellings are designed one to face Powell Street and the other one to face the lane in that configuration.
That's right.
And in the DCP, there's a provision that if dwellings are designed in that way, one facing the street, one facing the lane, they should have a separation between them of 10 metres. And the separation between these two dwellings is only, I think, 4.8, which does seem quite close. Can you respond to that?
Yes, that is correct. To be honest, I'm a bit confused by the DCP control because the Council's officer, in responding to that issue and objection, says the separation between the dwellings on a site such as this with multiple frontages is a merit issue. Whether or not it's a merit issue, I would suggest that if one looks at the separation between existing dwellings along Powell Street or other streets in the vicinity, they are generally a metre or less. In fact, the dwelling to the north of this property, I think its eaves adjoin the actual boundary. So the fact that there is a 4.8 metre separation between these two dwellings, if it is that there is a requirement for a 10 metre separation, it's not compliant, but it is way more generous than exists in the locality. My understanding is that it's a merit-based matter, if the council's own report is correct in that regard. And again, I would suggest that given the overall compliance of the project with not only the provisions but the intent and objectives of the LEP and the provisions of the DCP in their overwhelming majority, I would seek your support to a minor variation, as is encouraged by the guidance provisions of the Development Control Plan.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just following on from that, in a normal situation with new dwelling houses, they'll have a front setback,
yep.
Which matches the street, and then they have side setbacks,
yep.
and then they'll have a rear setback. But I think what you almost have in here, you've got the sort of front setbacks, but then all the other boundaries seem to be variations on a side setback, don't they? Because you've got the side setbacks to the lane and to the adjoining dwelling, and then the gap between the two dwellings is just a bit wider than a normal side setback. I think that's the issue, isn't it? It's this sort of spatial arrangement of these dwellings that's a little bit tight, maybe.
Well, I think with respect, all of the setbacks are compliant, with perhaps the variation to the one being between the two dwellings. And I think, again, that's reported in Council's report. The floor space ratio is less than is permissible. The building height is less than is permissible. And the setbacks to the street frontages and the lane frontages are in accordance with the requirements. The only area where there may be a non-compliance, and again, I query whether it's a merit case or not, I find it hard to read that part of the DCP. If there is, I'd suggest that a 5 metre setback between the two is well in excess of any setbacks between most of the dwellings in Powell Street in terms of the setbacks between those dwellings. And the reality is this is a dual occupancy on a block, whereas the other dwellings are historically existing dwellings that have a single dwelling and a garage. Over time, this zone has been created by Council to be a medium density zone, and change will therefore be part of that application of the medium density zone, encouraging a diversity of housing forms. I do think that the project is overwhelmingly compliant. Yes, it is going to be different than what is there now. It does not overshadow anyone. It does not overlook anyone because the upper windows in dwelling B are proposed to be screened, and I think there was a comment in Council's report saying that the stairwell window should be screened, to which my clients would have no objection. Again, I appreciate the concerns of the neighbours, but this is a compliant project, and I don't think, and in fact, I find the refusal quite confusing in that it is directly contradicted by statements within the officer's report, particularly with respect to conditions 1, 4 and 5.
Jason, you've got a question?
Yeah, it's probably partly a statement and partly a question. I think you're right that there's a medium density zone and things might change over time. Look, I also think you're right in terms of the compliance and some parts of the report seeming to be supportive, but also raising concern about site planning. And it's a site planning bit that worries me a bit. I've got to say, reading the report, looked, the compliance has ticks. Not all proposals do. You go out to the site and the land slopes up to Coogee Bay Road to the south, and you've got those big buildings, back of big buildings at front Coogee Bay Road, and that poses some privacy impacts. But the thing I went away from just looking at the block, and I think it's a little bit missing from your site analysis and your plans, is the configuration of buildings and rear open space and what's happening on the lane. And I think if this is to be the form of new dual occupancy development for the whole block, and I suspect others would use it as a precedent if it's to be approved, then what you have is fairly limited open space for any dwellings. And now I know, and I've read the submissions about the longevity within the family and the desire for 2 dwellings, but it did seem to me, just in terms of siting, that either keeping the dwelling, adding to the dwelling, having a new dwelling, given it's not a heritage item or conservation area, but then limiting a second dwelling to something that's more akin to a garage with a loft or a secondary dwelling that has more space to the rear would seem to be a better fit with what's along there, noting all the blocks have similar proportions. So it's partly a statement as much as anything, but there does appear to me to be other alternatives to accommodate 2 dwellings on the site, which is more sympathetic with the layout of the surrounding area and potentially a more appropriate precedent. What do you say to that?
Yes, obviously there are many ways to skin a cat, and one could come up with a variety of different designs. My clients, as I said, have lived there for a long time, and they want to live in dwelling B, and they want to rent out the dwelling in the front. They don't want to be. They have instructed their designer, their builder, to design a project that is compliant with the controls. And yep, that's going to be different to the single dwellings that are there now, but it is a medium density zone. Their private open space is more than compliant with the requirements of the development control plan. Would it be nice to have a bigger open space? Maybe. They certainly don't want a bigger open space. They don't want their private open space to be on the north side to be overlooked by and overlook Mr. McClellan's property. And I think it becomes.
I think the points you're making are the same you've made before. Medium density zone compliance, it's going to change over time, and this meets their needs. I understand.
Yeah, I guess, Mr. Perica, it's a subjective thing. I think further down Powell Street, the other end, there are some modern box-like buildings built. They are very different to the more heritage-looking buildings that are there, and yes, that's a change as well. I just think that there are DCPs put in place to guide applicants and council in the design and consideration. In fairness, these people have followed the DCP almost to the letter of the law, yet are suffering a recommendation which, frankly, I find to understand how it can be made in the context of the report that's been written.
All right, thank you.
Very reasonable.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
Peter?
just a question about overshadowing. I know on page 335 of the council report, it refers to there will be impacts on properties to the south from overshadowing, but in the on the shadow diagram provided, it doesn't actually show the properties to the south, in particular 28 Powell, so we can't see where the impact on those properties is. And but the report states that there will be impact, so we just can't see what that impact is.
I don't think, Chair, that I'm not sure that that's correct. I believe because our block is the southernmost block on that section of the street, it suffers significant overshadowing, which we outlined in our submission to your panel. I think the shadow diagrams with the application show that the proposed development overshadows Powell Lane, but I don't think it overshadows dwellings on the other side of Powell Lane. I'm pretty sure that's the case, and I think the council officer, in fact, makes a note of that. So unless I'm proved to be corrected, my view is that the project does not overshadow anyone's property, but it will partly overshadow Powell Lane during the day. The greatest impact is felt by us, by the very large dwelling which I provide you a photo of to the north, which completely overshadows the existing dwelling and Block A. And, that dwelling's been there a long time, so be it. But we're not creating a problem for anyone else that I'm aware of. Happy to stand corrected.
The report seems to indicate, it states on page 335, it is acknowledged that there will be additional overshadowing to the adjoining properties to the south, which is a direct result of the site orientation.
But there is actually, if you see the shadow, it will overshadow at maybe not at noon, but at 9 and going through to 3 when the shadows are longer. The shadow diagram submitted with the drawings.
Yeah, the drawings don't show the properties. For example, 28 Powell, which is the heritage listed property.
Yeah, look, I have to beg a little bit of ignorance on that one. I do note, however, that there is further commentary about the heritage value of that property, and that this development will not have an adverse impact upon that. I'm just trying to find the application, blah, blah, blah. The proposed development, it appears that the heritage planner doesn't have an objection to the proposal, is what I'm saying.
All right, any further questions?
No.
All right, so
thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes this matter, and that concludes the public meeting. So as I said in my opening, the panel will now go into closed session, and we will make our decisions on the items on the agenda, and our decisions and the reasons for those decisions will be published on Council's website as soon as possible. So thank you very much for attending, and the public meeting is closed at 2 minutes past 3. Thank you.
Thank you.